Okay, and we are back uh, here talking about Armitage III. It's the last time we went through a lot of the intro that was going on with the movie, sort of kind of laying out sort of the time and place, and then we also went through the first episode of the OVA. So now we're just going to be picking up where we left off, going right into the second episode of the OVA. So I'll go ahead and just kick us off with the opening, just going into the the summary of events. So basically, the second episode of the Armitage OVA opens with Armitage sitting on a high building overlooking the city, as she sees flashes of recent events, basically like some kind of a post-traumatic stress disorder. And then yeah, and so she's kind of going through that and definitely having an emotional response to it, as those things kind of flash through her mind. Um,
Yeah, once again, this scene was not in the Polymatrix. I do like the fact that they're showing the cityscape in the background. You can literally see the upright city and like the undercity, essentially dangling upside down. It's just a cool establishing shot for once again. I feel like this anime has a lot of those the rule of cool, mentality. So
this is one of the
I
few
think
scenes that you can tell that they, I don't know. I mean, you can tell they spent a little bit more time on this and thought about, this looks good. And she's wearing like a flowing sort of like overcoat kind of thing that looks cyberpunky, but also kind of rustic in its own way. So yeah, this is one of the few scenes I can think of that would kind of look good as a wallpaper, on your desktop, so to speak. But yeah, so then from that point it cuts to a woman running through the sewers, and she's captured and killed after begging for her life. We don't see the assailant though, but she's captured and killed and left in a freight elevator for mechanics to find, and they do. Um,
uh, this is a complete this whole murder is omitted from the movie. This you never see this person, and so there's this is where like the biggest one of the biggest divergences happen because they kind of once again they streamline the movie, so they just use McCannon as a substitute stand-in as a representation for like most of the thirds being murdered. I mean, you get
right.
you got the author and you'll get a few other people here and there. But this one is key because right before she's killed, she tries to say something, and they just kind of continue from there. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. So this is a little bit. So as an OVA, you can definitely tell that this is the creators sort of trying to get you back into the swing of things. They're doing an establishing shot with Armitage, doing a little bit of flashbacks of some things to kind of remind you of what's going on, showing you this woman running through the sewers and being killed. Kind of saying, remember how this is, people are being, or that these robots are being hunted. Essentially, that's what's going on here, guys. And then, so kind of going on, back at the police station, the squad reviews the footage of the woman who was killed, and some of them actually make jokes about it a little bit. It's kind of lighthearted, in some ways, or maybe callous, I guess is a better way to put it. And so you can kind of tell that the police, being human, don't really regard the robots and seconds and thirds or whatever as being on the same level. So
I think
Syllabus,
they reveal that the victim was also a dancer as well, I believe.
right?
Um,
So yeah, that's you brought up a good point earlier in the previous episode where McCannon and then Jessica and now
Jessica.
this woman, they're all artists of different kinds. So it's hard to to say. I mean, of course, these are animators that are doing this, but it's hard to find something that is more human than art. You know, math or whatever you could maybe argue is not particularly that human. It's because it's kind of just cold and calculating, like a robot would want to do, or really anything else. But art is sort of like a machine would have no need to do this, and yet these machines are. And so the three that we have seen up close and personal are all different kinds of artists. So it's sort of it is a subtle way, and I'm proud of the filmmakers for doing this, but it's a subtle way of them showing, hey, these robots are not like just robots. They are trying to be human.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is the machines are expressing themselves. They're
Right.
able to do that. They're able to move past, and yeah, that's just one of the things that there's kind of they kind of give an example or they give multiple reasons why this might be later on in the film. So I'll make sure to bring those up. Why that is kind of like maybe the relation. They don't give it 100% full answer. So it's kind of like take what you will.
Yeah, exactly. So Syllabus is asked about Renee and says that Renee is being held in the ICU under guard and is unconscious. Um, Later on, we hear that this hospital where he's being held is government controlled. It's not really important now, but it does kind of become a little bit more important later. Um, so the lieutenant, takes the information kind of under review and kind of goes on, and he noticed, and he kind of he kind of asked the group slash notices that all the thirds are female, and he's like, I wonder why that is, um, and and then they kind of state at this point that they have researchers at the police station who are looking into this, but they don't have any clear answers yet. Um, so, so Syllabus and the lieutenant have a chat in the next scene, essentially, where the lieutenant expresses his suspicion about Armitage being a robot, um, and then kind of that scene sort of ends, and Ross Syllabus goes home alone and sends a message to Armitage asking her to come back. So from the last episode, we saw that Armitage, that there was kind of a big fight with Renee Danclaud, where Armitage fled after kind of her and Ross sort of had a bit of a falling out. So this is the OVA kind of reminding you that Armitage is kind of out and about and is not reported back in, but Ross is reaching out to her, kind of saying, "Hey, partner, come back and let's like work together on this."
Yeah, they it's one of those things that they give you. They've done it multiple times at this point. Now uh, they show a photo at Armitage's desk. I believe it's only in the OVA. They show a photo of her and what looks like her father, and then they show kind of a moving photo, like a clip, uh, on her desk at her apartment. So it's one of those. It's just a little interesting point. And then the following scene is completely OVA original, essentially. Which, yeah, go. I'll let you go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, just one more little point to what you were saying. Yeah, it shows. I guess it is at this point where it does show Armitage in a photo with Doctor Asakura, who is kind of her father figure. So they start to plant that seed at this point for some stuff that comes up later. But yeah, so after Syllabus sends the message to Armitage, the scene switches kind of actually during that and shows Armitage listening to the message on her phone, essentially. And then it kind of pans out and it shows that she's in an alley. She finishes the message and walks away. And as she's walking, she is accosted by two thugs. They try to mug her, but they begin to run away when they realize that she is a robot and that they are outmatched, essentially. Um, she begins to.
I don't actually think they. I don't think it's because they of the being a robot, uh, but they realize she's also armed as well. That's the other. There's two things. She has her firearm. You don't actually see any metal parts, but you see her damaged. Um, and so
I guess
it's
that's
kind of a
why.
weird scene
Yeah.
because yeah, because it's kind of hard to interpret. But like you don't. She has blemishes on her skin from the battle with Dan Claude earlier. But once again, you don't see like it's not gore or anything like that. Um, and essentially, they get nervous, and then she just punches the big dude and who has a knife on her, and she just takes him out in a single hit, and that's of course the other one then starts to fear for his life.
Yeah, exactly. So the I kind of just assumed that it was because she was a robot, but basically they begin to quickly figure out that they don't want any piece of what's going on here, and so she defeats them essentially, and then begins to interrogate the second one, asking him where the writer is. And this is a point where I have a note that asking myself, how does she know about the writer at this stage? Because I thought about it, and what we've been talking about so far, I can't remember the point at which the writer has been mentioned.
She would have had a list. She was given the list of all the thirds, and so
So
she
she's looking for the writer specifically just because she's on the list.
that is what I've been. That's what my assumption was.
Okay.
Um, the once again they her investigating is completely. This is the OVA part. Part of it adds some context because it's a little bit more of a cold jump, like a cold cut in scenes for the movie.
Hmm.
Um, and so this, the big part of this though too is she's inquiring about the writer, but she's also during the interrogation, slash fight, she kind of goes manic a little bit. She's
She's a
a
little bit
little more
unhinged.
unhinged.
Yeah.
Yeah, and uh, the of course she simmers down the moment she gets injured, and the person calls her a monster, which then reminds her of the Dan Claude conversation where he calls her a monster. Um, the part of the both it's like her being emotional is one thing, but towards the end of this whole thing you'll like it's kind of maybe relayed to why she's a little bit more unhinged at this moment too.
Yeah.
A nature versus nurture thing is kind of possibly at hand. So I'll get we can talk about that later because don't want to spoil anything at this point. But yeah, so all right, go on.
Spoilers for this movie, by the way. We're going to be spoiling the whole thing. Yeah. So you've of course realized that by now. So anyway, so she begins to inquire about the writer, um, and then the scene switches, and one of Ross Syllabus' fellow policemen, Eddie Barrows, who we've talked about a little bit in the last episode, uh, messages Ross saying that he has an appointment with the conception company. And then Eddie says that he is deciphering some correspondence between Armitage, from Armitage before she disappeared, but he needs some time to decode it because it's in. I think he literally says it's in machine language, which is kind of an interesting concept for the time. There's this, and then there's a little bit about later in I think episode 3 or 4 where they have a little bit of a matrix, like they literally go into basically the cyberspace kind of matrix style thing, which we'll get to eventually. But I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, and like I said, all this is strictly OVA territory. This conversation, these scenes, the follow-up scene as well. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, Good note. And then, next scene, Syllabus meets with Eugene Allen, the VP of Public Relations at Conception. Um, uh, so he's meeting with him and talking a little bit, asking a couple questions, and an attractive servant robot walks around. So this robot looks to me like a Sailor Moon character. Am I crazy for thinking that?
No, she's 100% I think it's supposed to look like Usagi or Serena, depending on which version you're talking about. But yeah, it's meant. I think it's kind of just a kind of a nod because the um the slogan was the home robotization was like for the company
Mm-hmm.
and the peculiarities of the VP. Talks about like uh, something along the lines of making fantasies or something, or like living, and that's the purpose of these robots. Uh, and at one point, just when he's talking, uh, the this machine takes a knee,
Yes.
but he uses her other knee as a chair. Um,
And sits on it,
Such a
and it
weird
is
scene.
really, really weird. It is super weird.
But it's like it's most definitely the idea of like machines as these machine women are as objects, and it's like him like living his power fantasy essentially. It's You get a real good insight on who this VP is essentially. Like he's
Yeah.
just you know
I mean,
yeah.
other than that, and maybe a couple other weird things that he says, he seems fairly normal. But then with that and sort of the like making fantasies into reality, it is sort of like, this is definitely not like a regular guy. That and he starts to become he's a little bit cagey about some of the questions that Syllabus is asking him. Because kind of jumping back into this, Syllabus specifically asks about Dr. Asakura, but and I forget exactly the way that Alan words it because it is kind of weird. But basically, he's told that Dr. Asakura is no longer with the company, and therefore Alan has no idea where he is and doesn't give up any other information. Just like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Bye. And so at that point, Ross leaves.
Though this is one of the first parts of this is one of the few moments where in the OVA you get to see him be like a real detective.
Yes.
Because what he does is during this conversation he pulls some information out of his pocket and accidentally drops a Zippo. Um, and then at the end of this scene, he goes in as he's being escorted to the door by the machine. The guy, the VP leaves, and the robots sing him out, and he goes to light a cigarette, which he, to the best of our knowledge, he doesn't smoke. But then the robot goes back in to grab it, and that's when he uses that time to quick run over to the personal computer to try to gather information.
Right, I forgot about that. Yeah, yeah, that's all true. Um, uh,
No, because I was lying, yo.
just just lies.
Making it up as I go along. This is my fanfic right here. You've played into my hand. Okay.
Um, so the scene switches, and somewhere else we see Armitage walking in the rain. And then switching back, Syllabus continues to do research from his car. uh, looking at the screen and doing some different things. The scene switches again to a crime scene where Syllabus and the police are. I think this is an overhead shot of like the police cars kind of gather around a home, and then it kind of goes inside of the home and shows that there is an old woman with glasses with a bullet hole in her head, and kind of blood coming out of it. And she's clearly dead. Chris, the the deputy of the police, is there kind of as the forensics are going over the scene and talking to Ross, and he says that he can only guess that two robots are capable of doing this, Dan Claude or Armitage.
At this point, they don't realize they don't. So he just says two people could do it. It's because
They
Dan
shouldn't
Claude
have
is not
realized that
known to
Renee's.
be a machine or a
Yeah.
robot. Dan Claude is, yeah.
Okay. So that's me
And the reason,
editorializing. Sorry.
yeah, yeah. So it's the yeah, they then proceed to a flashback sequence of the events, right?
Right. Right. So the next thing is that is right at that point the scene flashes back to when the woman was alive, when the gray haired woman was alive, and alone, more or less drinking wine. She is on the phone talking with somebody, and she hangs up because she says she has to continue to write her novel. So she hangs up the phone and then calls on the computer to bring up the novel that she's writing, and she begins to continue to kind of narrate the writing. She's not typing. She's just like saying words, and they're being recorded and written on the screen. So at this point, someone enters the room and surprises her, and the writer asks if the person is Armitage before she is killed, and we still don't see who the assailant is, but that's the point at which the flashback ends, and we flash forward to the present. Um,
So yeah, they do. The only thing they show is the assailant is wearing black, like a black coat, but also wearing black like pants and shoes. So like with the overcoat, you're like that could be Armitage, but the legs are scrawny as heck. So, but it's very interestingly drawn. Like so, uh, you're also led to believe like okay, well it may be a guy, but at the same time, at this point, you're like, well, Dan Claude's arrested. Um, you know, and held in the ICU. And one of the things that that deputy mentioned before was when he said suspected that it'd either be Dan Claude or Armitage. Um, the reason Ross asks why, and he says something along the lines of um, Armitage once said that she kills or she feels sorry for robots that are forced to commit crime, so she kills them quickly.
mm,
Um, and which is just so kind of it's kind of weird thing, but then but to use that as your leap in logic to killing thirds, because the thirds aren't committing crimes, so that I always found that to be a weird statement. uh and but during the murder, because she it has it on, essentially being written as she's dying, she's asking, oh, are you Armitage? You tricked me. And it's like, but the you're left. This is actually this scene, the murder investigation here, is a part of the film, Polymatrix, and so because you didn't see Armitage in the alleyway fighting the thugs, inquiring about a writer, it just kind of goes to a cold cut. Last time you saw Armitage, she jumped off the church, and the next scene is kind of like here, or are they talking about her here? So it's kind of a weird jump in logic. It's kind of hard to follow, um, and you're not really you're not really giving an excuse or saying, "Hey, she's following the list," or what how the writer really came about. And like I said, this it is a little jarring. There wasn't another step at this point. So yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so another artist is being killed here. So we have to add to that list. We now have a writer. So yeah, so we flash forward back to the present, and the so the words on the screen kind of come up, and sort of what was recorded there when the writer was killed, due to the voice recording, the words at least, that leads the deputy, Chris, to think that the killer is Armitage, and he's clearly like jumping to conclusions. It's like the person doesn't say they're Armitage; they just ask the question, and so Syllabus kind of is like, "Well, are you sure?" And Chris is like, "Well, you can't just ignore the evidence." And I'm like, "This isn't really evidence, bro." So I don't know. It's just one of those points where it's sort of a side character, is sort of dumbly voice acted, in my opinion, and it just kind of made me laugh. But basically, continuing on, Syllabus looks for any mail from Armitage, in the writer's computer, but only finds a message from Pluto, who, as far as I could remember, we haven't been told about yet.
So that's because of Eddie in the OVA. The Eddie in the OVA, he he cracks the machine language code and it sees a message from Jessica, and it shows her finished artwork in the background as her
Right.
lover is being painted as an angel, uh, and yeah, that is when you hear the overlay of Pluto's message. Well, like that's at least Pluto pieced it together that way with Jessica, I guess. Um, and Eddie's like wondering like who Pluto is. Like, but in the Polymatrix, they just have Pluto's message going like hot. If I remember correctly, they just like kind of just there. Like Armitage is just receiving it. Um, but when Eddie discovers the message, he then tries to let out to contact the chief, or I can't remember his name off the top of my head. And he's in a discussion with someone else. I don't know if you have the notes for that one. I don't quite remember that conversation too hot.
Sorry,
Um,
who's in discussion with someone else?
the police chief. He's in. That's right, because I think this is when they talk about. Um, this is when they learn the big reveal, isn't it? About it was the autopsy because the police chief had asked one of the police officers to do the autopsy of the dancer.
Yes. Um,
Um,
of the dancer.
so the dancer who died, who was shot and killed on the lift.
Right.
Um, then it cuts to Ross driving, and they drop the bombshell on him then, while uh in the Polymatrix, they are sitting at the precinct, and they have they show a photo of McCannon. Uh, they show McCannon's, autopsy, showing surgical cuts and like a normal cadaver essentially, but then they show cuts around her womb, and
So
that's when
that
they drop
is
the
so
bomb.
that's about to come up. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. So go ahead
Okay. So
if
I
you
was
want.
just
Yeah, the big reveal.
so basically, yeah, you're a little bit early, but that is pretty much coming up right, here in a little bit. So basically, we get a message from Pluto, um, and Syllabus wants to find where this mail originated from. The scene goes over to Eddie, who cracks communications, working on deciphering, and finds the full list of thirds that is coming from Pluto. The lieutenant. So scene switching again, or I guess this is sort of an adjacent scene. Like it shows Eddie cracking the code, and then like he looks up from his computer, and we see the lieutenant talking with one of the researchers. Um, and so he's talking about the research being done on the bodies of the thirds, and he seems surprised about something that they are able to do, that they figured out that these thirds are able to do. So switching back to Syllabus, so Syllabus calls the lieutenant and asks if he put a warrant out for Armitage. And the lieutenant says that, of course I did. I had no choice. And this is, and so it's like, okay. But then the lieutenant takes his time to tell Syllabus, hey, Eddie deciphered the code and that it is a list of the thirds. Syllabus says he already knows Pluto is the last name on that list, and the lieutenant is surprised and asks how. Syllabus tells him about the writer's murder scene. And this is where I had to make a note that there's a really awkward "you, me, and the wall" dialogue callback that I didn't talk about in here, but it's a little bit earlier when the lieutenant calls Syllabus into his office and says something about something or other and says, "That's just between you, me, and the wall." In the subtitled version, this isn't in there, but in the dub, the camera pans away from Syllabus' mouth, so they decide to make a very weird, awkward "you, me, and the wall" dialogue callback. Anyway, so
Yeah. All right.
yeah.
I didn't I wouldn't have known.
Anyway,
This whole scene's not in the movie, because when they yeah, for this conversation, Pluto just speaks out into the ether essentially, and then they have a separate conversation in the
yeah,
precinct. So yeah, continue.
exactly. So he tells him about the writer's murder scene, and then the lieutenant takes his time also to say that he learned that Lavania Waitley, that she was pregnant, and that the reason all the thirds are female appears to be because they can get pregnant. Dun dun dun.
So I like the way this is done in the film because once again the Lavanya is not in the movie, but what they did is they show McCannon, they and that's when they do the big reveal of hey McCannon was pregnant, and that's the big surprise. But at the same time, then Ross does a mental callback to the manager at the bar being completely hammered, being like, I know her better than anyone. There's no way she could have been a robot. And just putting more emphasis on, oh, okay, so not only that, I know it was, but they had a romantic relationship. If he might have already, like he may or may not have known about the pregnancy, but he at least was, he knew that she wasn't just like a pleasure robot, right?
Mm.
So he thought, they had a romantic relationship where he knew. So that's kind of uh, a nice way to kind of cut out a lot of scenes that weren't, that I wouldn't say they're not necessary, but it's just like a lateral move. You had to save time. You did a very good way, and it's a it doesn't. It's the part that's neat about the OVA is yes, you are seeing more characters, more people, more murder essentially, but it's giving you more. The stakes are higher because you're seeing more of these happening. Uh, but at the same time, to save the time but get the same impact, it's still solid. And I actually do like I said, that little bit of editing just to show that um, flashback to the manager again was like that was pretty effective, I thought.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Okay. Um, so that's kind of a bit of a big reveal in this episode here. But then the scene changes to Armitage people watching, and Syllabus walks up and sees her, and the two begin to chat a little bit. They go inside this nearby building, which is apparently where they have both tracked Pluto to. Um, so they go inside this building and they enter a room and find Pluto, who is a teenage boy, and tells them that he too is a third. He says that he is the last third that was ever made, and he reveals.
so it's done different. Yeah, it's done differently in like he doesn't outright say it like this in the movie, but so I remember being like that's kind of jarring.
It's weird,
That he
yeah.
just straight up says it. Yeah, because I prefer the way he says it in the film. He does say it again the same way. They just omit this kind of little bit. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So then he also tells them that his real name is Julian Moore, and he doesn't want them to call him by his handle. I think he actually says handle anymore. He wants them to call him Julian. Also, something else about this scene is that as they walk in, they're like, "What are you doing?" Because he seems to be playing with like some kind of Game Boy sort of thing. It looks honestly a little bit closer to a PSP in design. Not exactly, really, but just like between the two, it's a little bit like wider screened like that. But anyway, they ask him like what he's doing, and he says that he is uploading his memories or recording his memories, and they're like, why? And he's like, as a backup, of course, and just sort of like a snotty little teenager attitude there. I thought that was sort
Yeah.
of kind of weird and interesting.
Well, I mean, they give him that attitude, and then he does that kind of he plays his character, his as the young teen, and he kind of gets under Armitage's skin in the next scene where they're going down the lift, and that's when they're talking about call me Julian Moore
Yeah,
instead. So,
yeah, exactly. So they ride an elevator to somewhere. I guess he's going to show them something. I couldn't remember at this point why they decided to get on the elevator.
yeah, I believe he's supposed to be taking them to
The
I
database center.
honestly, yeah, so I don't remember the OVA, this portion of like they do kind of a bigger heart. Like I find that the cut is just a little more abrupt in the film.
Hmm.
Um, because essentially this is just to get to another bigger set piece.
Yeah,
Um,
at this point, yeah.
you know, yeah, and so I actually really do like this scene.
Hmm.
It was the concept was pretty cool. And yeah, so I'll just let you talk more about it. But
Yeah. So my guess is that because of what happens next is they is that they're going on this elevator um, to in order to get to where Pluto's backup is being held, and they do some work in episode 3, which we'll eventually get to, obviously. But they do some work in episode 3 where they are kind of hacking into this data center and doing more stuff. So I'm thinking that they were going to do that, and then they kind of get interrupted, which is what I'll talk about next. So they're on this elevator, and it begins to fail and then fall, and then um,
I think the whole point of this is to take him to Dan Claude or to give him the real information because the entire time he's talking about um and this is where he drops the fact that he was the last on the list and how he'll be a kid forever. And he's the only male third because this is all kind of like a big reveal. It's kind of a big little exposition dump, but and he teases Armitage essentially a little bit on here, but yeah, uh, he's stating that the thirds, the kind of concept is at this point the thirds are now thought to exist to help make children. I mean,
mm,
that's whether it be Martian population, um, also just so the idea of I think they talk about this a little bit later as well, uh, but the idea of a mother needing to be more well-rounded. They just can't be like a birthing pod, So that's why like that kind of hints to these women being artists of some sort. They have an emotional connection. They have growth. They're not just a standard robot. And so that you kind of this is at least one of the reasons why all of them seem to be artists and female at
mm,
this point.
okay, some sort of like softer ideology, some sort of sensitivity uh, to to all of them. Okay, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, so let's see. So the elevator that they're riding down begins to fail and then fall, and it's like sliding down, but it's like going at like a essentially a terminal speed that will get them all killed. And at this point, Armitage kind of grabs hold of the other two. And I thought this was pretty funny. I wrote that she turns herself into a seatbelt because that's essentially what she's doing. She's keeping them from when they slam into the ground, that they don't just like crash into something that is unforgiving. So,
Yeah, she pins them against the back chain link fence, and as this thing is, just going, at high velocity, she's bracing them, and I do appreciate that. Um, Ross takes damage from this. It's
oh
not like
yeah,
the moment they collide, because and the only reason why they don't go bursting into flames is because there's a pool of water at the bottom. And once this is kind of pretty much in everything. Anytime as a gamer, like anytime you see one of these elevators, like it's gonna fall at some point, or I'm gonna get jumped. It's always a number one like fight scene, whether
hmm
it be Metal Gear Solid, um, Stellar Blade, like any of these things. Like these things are made to fail, and you're made to be a trap. Like you can't escape it, and now you're in for the ride. So it's kind of
yeah.
a
Stellar Blade
staple,
tends to.
essentially.
And that's one. That's funny you should bring that up because when I was looking at this elevator, I was like, this is like what's in Stellar Blade. Like this, it's not perfectly vertical. It's slanted and it's like a freight sort of elevator with sort of a fence around it, and it's a big giant platform. And I was like, this is. I mean, I'm sure that everybody steals it from somebody else, but I was like, they had this in Stellar Blade too. I guess just I don't know. Maybe it's something cyberpunky about it that I never really thought about.
Well, it's the idea of having carrying heavy freight, heavy cargo vehicles. They exist in the world, and but when it's like you can't necessarily have a road that leads from a high enough elevation, and it's too steep to drive straight down.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but once again, it's been enough trope that these are destined to fail. So if I ever have to get on one, I'm like, it's one of those like, yeah, I know it's in my head, but my subconscious is gonna be like, yeah, you're doomed, right?
You like
Or your
crack your
imagination is gonna run wild like Calvin and Hobbes. You're just gonna everything's gonna be perfectly fine and smooth, but in your brain, you're fantasizing about the impending doom that's happening or something. But
yeah
yes, anyway,
you
she does
you've
turn herself into a human seatbelt. She grabs onto the chain link fence behind Ross. Ross is also cradling Pluto. And essentially, when they impact the bottom, instead of just smashing and bursting the flames, it is just a water basin. In theory, to probably have this exact mentality of like, hey, if this does crash, it's not going to cause collateral damage to the surrounding area. Um, and Ross takes heavy damage.
right.
So
So they crash, and Ross is uh, is badly injured in the right arm and ribs on the right side as well. And at this point, Renee Dan Claude shows up in a mech suit and starts to hunt them as they try to run away. Um, Armitage tries to protect the other two, but is nearly killed before Syllabus is able to help her by shooting the protective cover off of the mech that Renee is piloting. And it should also be noted that he's barely able to lift the gun, and he actually has to lift the gun and then um, have Julian aim it for him. And and anyway, that's just sort of an interesting like teamwork makes the dream work sort of moment there.
well, it's always a neat scene because when Julian picks up, helps him hold up the wrist, his eyes flicker at that exact moment right before he fires, and he happens to hit the perfect that because at this point they don't know it's Dan Claude in because it's a canopied giant
Yeah,
vehicle,
it's hidden.
and so. But when his eyes flicker, it's like he's getting the targeting right to help Ross, and then he happens to hit the latch perfectly, which blows open the top canopy. So
Exactly, exactly. And then there's also a line that Julian says here where it's like basically like don't like make sure not to kill the important person that we all need to be able to solve this mystery. It doesn't say it exactly that way, but it's something along those lines. And that's sort of when I think when Ross asks him to help him aim. But so basically, yeah, shooting out with the protective cover, and Renee Dan Claude is revealed. Um, and this is the point where Armitage comes face to face with Dan Claude, and then she kind of gets free of where she was sort of trapped, and punches him in the face. And it's at this point that she realizes that this Dan Claude is not human. Um, and they fight a little bit more, and she sends him over a waterfall and thinks that he is defeated. Um,
Yeah, so this scene was kind of fun because early in the fight, after the canopy is open, or roughly around the same part, she had taken off her jacket. It's a very subtle thing, but you because she stuffs it in a like radiator vent. Um, and when she gets Dan Claude knocks her back into a wire grate because they're in the sewer system at this point, and she gets entangled into in a unique way. It just looks kind of neat. And then when she does, essentially the vehicle overheats and starts to malfunction.
mm,
Dan Claude gets distracted, looks at it because like it shows like the CPU catching fire essentially. Uh, and then the very next scene, he looks and she's just crouched, essentially like Batman, just right in front of him, and she handcuffs him to the vehicle so he
mhm.
cannot escape. Uh, it's just his petty line as he's like just falling over the waterfall, like just he curses her out as he falls, and it was silly,
the, vo-
but it
the
just seems so
the voice
appropriate.
acting for this part is actually pretty funny too, because it's like wah, you know, he's just sort of Looney Tunesy falling over the waterfall. But yeah, he's he's thrown over and is essentially kind of defeated. Um, at this point, Syllabus is laying there, unable to move, and calls for Armitage to help him, and he says, and Ross says, um, police don't.
They're leaving him for the police. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So help me up, and Armitage and Julian begin to leave, and Ross says, police don't leave their own behind, and they go ahead and start to leave anyway. And he says, "Oh, you're cold, woman," and she turns around and she kisses him, or I forget the order, but basically
Yeah.
she kisses him and then looks at him and says, and it's different in the sub versus the dub, but she basically says, "I'll always be cold," and then he passes out as they leave him there. The last scene um, is it switches, and it shows Renee's body floating up in the water. Apart from the mech, it's just his body floating up in the water, with his head face up, and his eyes open, and he smiles, and that's the end of the episode.
Yeah, that little segment right there is omitted from the film if I remember correctly, which doesn't really matter one way or the other. It's just like I'm like, all right, I can see them cutting that for no reason because it's kind of but at this point, they think they now have there's now a second Dan Claude, right?
Right.
So that's kind of like the confusion because he's supposed to be in a hospital. He's supposed to be in an ICU at this point. So how did he get there? And that confusion.
It's like, what are we,
But yeah,
what's really going on there? Then we have kind of other parts of the mystery have been solved, and then that one opens up anew.
yeah, exactly. So at this point, what we do know is the thirds are women because they have children. Julian doesn't really know his purpose in life. He just kind of looks at it as he was the last production model, and he's kind of made as a joke because they made him a man, and they also made him a child essentially, so he could never grow old.
Right.
So he sees that as an impediment.
The joke's on
Uh,
me. That's what he says.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I always thought his character voice was appropriately like angsty, obnoxious. It has the right level of like irritation, but also like being a smartass.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, it's kind of works. It's not necessarily, I wouldn't want to listen to it all day. It's not going to do it. I'm not going to do an audiobook listening to that, but I think
God,
that just
I can imagine.
um yeah, I just found that it worked pretty well. And this happened, like I said, this episode happened to have a lot of things that are just not in the film. This is, I think, one of the bigger parts. While episode one was pretty similar, episode two, deviates quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's I find a lot of these extra things to be to be good. It helps me to follow along a little bit better than I was able to watching Polymatrix. But yeah, so I think that's gonna wrap it for this episode of the OVA, and also this episode of our run through Armitage III. So yeah, I think that'll do it, and we'll continue on again later with the OVA. But with that, thank you for watching, and we'll catch you next time.
Take it easy.
Bye.